Let's be clear. What happened to George Floyd is a horrific act of police brutality. This should never have happened, and we must ensure that it never happens here in Texas. I join the millions of Americans who seek swift justice in this case. George Floyd's death has touched every corner of our country. People are rightfully angry. But the beautiful thing about America is that every person has the right to make their voices heard, to protest against this injustice. However, violence and vandalism is never the answer, and they have no place in Dallas, Fort Worth, or anywhere in the state of Texas. You know, ironically, those acts of violence and vandalism, they are overshadowing the death of George Floyd, rather than shining a light on the injustice that occurred. They drown out the voices of those who are seeking to protest peacefully. In response, Texas is working with local law enforcement to maintain order and to uphold public safety so that peaceful protesters can make their voices heard. To that end, it is essential that we end the violence, the vandalism, and the looting that we've seen over the past few days during the course of these protests. That is why we have deployed more than 1,000 Department of Public Safety officers, as well as hundreds of Texas National Guard, just to the Dallas-Fort Worth region alone. More are being deployed across the entire state of Texas. We are also working with our partners in the U.S. Attorney's Office as well as the FBI to quell any uprisings of violence that may occur. Now, some of the violence that we're seeing is not being done by people who reside in Dallas or even in Texas. Instead, the violence is coming into Texas from across state lines. It's committed by criminals who are hijacking peaceful protests in order to plunder and in order to loot. That is why we are also working with all 4 United States attorneys in Texas to ensure that these criminals are going to be subject to federal prosecution. Our immediate task at hand is to ensure that we restore calm in our communities, but restoring calm in our communities does not end our task. Our work will not end until justice, fairness, and equality become a reality in every part of our great state. And Texas is up to this task. Texas is recognized as a national leader in criminal justice reform. Texas passed the Timothy Cole Act, the Sandra Bland Act, and the James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Act. I signed a law that places body cameras on law enforcement uniforms to make a record of all police encounters. I signed into law the Timothy Cole Exoneration Review Commission. The Innocence Project, which is known across the United States, perhaps across the entire world, they labeled Texas the gold standard in innocence reform. And Texas has exonerated more individuals than any other state since 1989. We are up to the task of doing both, correcting injustices and restoring safety in our communities. What I have seen as governor is that Texans can overcome any challenge. We can put an end to the violence that is gripping our cities. We can remedy the injustices that have plagued African American and other minority communities in Texas. And we will seize this moment to bridge the divides that exist in our state so that we can and we will keep Texas the greatest state in the United States of America. At this time, I will pass it to Mayor Eric Johnson.
Thank you, Governor Abbott. I want to say that, first of all, I appreciate your words and your support. And I also want to thank Mayor Price and her team for joining us here today. I want to echo the governor's statement about George Floyd. What happened in Minneapolis was brutal, inexcusable, and tragic. And Mr. Floyd's death reopened a painful wound that runs deep in our city, our state, and our country. It's a wound, however, that will not heal on its own. The city of Dallas has and must continue to address our challenges head on. As you all know, I love this city. I grew up right here in West Dallas and Oak Cliff, and it's the only city that I've ever called or ever wanted to call home. I'm proud to be a Dallasite, a Texan, and an American, and I'm honored to serve as the mayor of my hometown. No one goes into public service because they believe everything is perfect and every problem has already been solved. I grew up surrounded by inequities in historically underserved communities in this city. While those of us up here haven't always agreed on every issue, we all dedicated ourselves to public service because we want to improve the lives of our neighbors in our community. And our community right now is expressing legitimate concerns, fears, and complaints about a history of systemic issues in this country. We should hear them. We should talk to them. And we should respect them and their rights to express themselves. It's up to us, the public officials up here, and all of us who are watching and listening, to heed these calls for justice. On Friday, we will have a special called meeting of the Dallas City Council to discuss the events of the past week and to talk about what this city can do better. In the meantime, I want to reiterate that we will not tolerate those who want to come into our city and exploit these peaceful protests to cause mischief for its own sake or for their own personal gain. The violence, vandalism, and theft that we saw committed by some groups of people over the weekend is not reflective of the city that I know. And much of it was perpetrated by people who are not residents of the city of Dallas. They don't pay taxes here. It's not their property they're destroying. This isn't their home. These are outsiders who came into our city to cause trouble knowing that they don't have to live with any of the consequences. I'm very grateful to Governor Abbott for the additional resources he's provided to help maintain order and to allow for peaceful protests to go on without disruption. And I'm also thankful for the people of the city of Dallas who've been overwhelmingly supportive and have heeded our calls for peace. Our people have been through extraordinarily difficult times in the past few months. The ongoing pandemic, the economic turmoil, and the unrest of the past few days have been heartbreaking to watch unfold in our great city. We're doing all that we can to help our residents get through these difficult times. As usual, our people are responding with dignity and with grace. They're helping each other out, and that's how we're going to get through this together. So thank you, Governor, and may God bless the city of Dallas, the state of Texas, and the United States of America. And now I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, the Mayor of Fort Worth, Betsy Price.
Thank you, Eric, or Mayor Johnson. It's hard sometimes not to call your good friends by their first name, but we appreciate you hosting us today. Governor Abbott, thank you for joining us here in Fort Worth, Dallas region today. As we all deal with really difficult issues, and I want to thank Mayor Johnson and Chief Hall for their support in this. We live in a very regional area. People go back and forth, so we are heavily dependent on each other, and our citizens are often Eric's citizens during the day and vice versa for all of us. It really is intertwined. Our own Chief Ed Krause is with us today. The protests continued last night in Fort Worth despite the fact that we had the curfew, by and large peaceful, and our chief and our officers and joined with our protesters in compassion, love, and some sharing of friendship. It was incredibly moving last night to watch the images of our chief kneeling and praying alongside the protesters, of him moving the SWAT team back on the promise that they would leave. Oftentimes, it's that little bit of communication that helps unwind this. Texans are lawful citizens, and they want to protest and express their outrage over the horrific killing of George Floyd. And most of them are very, very peaceful. And our chief has always led with a servant's heart and a warrior's heart when it's the proper place. I want to echo the governor's comments on the George Floyd killing. It is horrific. The national outcry and what we're seeing echoed here in Texas is an injustice that our communities, as Eric said, are feeling deeply, as are all of us as leaders. All of this region has had tragic instances. Fort Worth had our own killing of a Tatiana Jefferson just 7 months ago. That was tragic. Our community is still hurting, still reeling. Much hard work has gone into that, but nothing more than listening and compassion, where Texans can hear us and know that someone cares. And I think that helps get the healing further along than nearly anything. The protests and the demonstrations that we've seen in Fort Worth are about people exercising their First Amendment rights. I applaud the young men and women who have courageously and respectfully been involved in those protests. It's not just Fort Worth residents, as you said, Eric. Many of them are outside of our region who are here. Our DPS resources, National Guard that you've made available, while we haven't called them in, they've stood ready, and we know exactly where they are if we do have to. But they're there to help resist that people who want to incite violence. Our communities of color deserve to be heard, and their message deserves to resonate with all of us, a collective compassion. I look forward to continuing this hard work with you, Governor Abbott, and with you, Mayor Johnson, along with all our communities. And I know that as an end result, peaceful demonstrations, the right to express your First Amendment, we all come together, listen, and care. Fort Worth, Dallas region, and indeed the entire state of Texas will be stronger for it. Thank you.